I'm an ER doctor, and over the years I've learned that the line between life and death is thinner than most people ever want to imagine. I've held patients' hands as their heartbeats slowed to silence. I've fought against time with chest compressions and medications, and I've stood in that awful stillness when all the monitors go flat and you realize you can't bring someone back. It's a silence you never forget, because in the emergency room, it doesn't last long. There's always another siren, another stretcher rushing through the doors. But there was one night when that silence was broken in a way I still can't explain. I was there when a patient died, beyond any hope of recovery. I saw the monitor fall flat. I heard the words called out to mark the time of death. And yet, 30 minutes later, I also heard that same monitor erupt into life again, screaming out with a rhythm that shouldn't have been possible. That night has haunted me ever since. It began on a rainy evening, the kind of night when the ER feels like a storm shelter for the broken and bleeding. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the tile floor gleam like it had just been scrubbed, though the smell told another story. Iodine and antiseptic failing to mask the metallic tang of blood and the sour musk of bodies under stress. The waiting room was overflowing, restless figures shifting in their plastic chairs, coughing, groaning, whispering in low voices. Inside the trauma bays, the air was electric with urgency, nurses moving with the practiced rhythm of instinct, machines beeping like a mechanical symphony, the ever-present murmur of radios crackling with incoming calls. To anyone else, it might have looked like chaos, but to me, it was a rhythm, one I'd lived inside for decades. Around 9:30 p.m., the radio broke through the chatter with a tone in the paramedics' voices I recognized immediately. Flat, clipped, urgent. Unresponsive male, possible cardiac arrest, CPR in progress, ETA 5 minutes. Those words roll off the tongue easily, but they carry a weight that everyone in the room feels. Within seconds, the team was in motion, setting up the crash cart, preparing the airway, drawing up medications, readying the defibrillator pads. There's no time for fear or hesitation, only precision. I remember glancing at the monitor, at the empty bed waiting for him, and feeling that strange prickle along the back of my neck that sometimes comes before a case you'll never forget. When the paramedics rolled in, I caught the look in their eyes before I saw the patient. They'd been working on him the whole ride, and their expressions told me they didn't think it would matter. But they handed him over, as they always do, because you never stop until you've given every possible chance. He was in his early 50s, I'd later learn, though under the harsh hospital lights he looked older. Skin pale, lips blue, chest rising only with the forced compressions of the bag mask. His shirt was cut away, his body slick with sweat and rain, and his eyes were open but vacant, glassy, already staring past us. We went into motion. The nurse handed me the first syringe of epinephrine, and I pushed it in, my other hand already on the patient's sternum, feeling the dull thud of compressions from the resident beside me. The defibrillator charged with its rising whine, and I called for everyone to clear. His body jolted as the shock tore through him, but the monitor didn't change. Still flat, still silent. We cycled again, compressions, airway, another round of medications, another shock. I counted each minute in my head, not because I wanted to, but because you can't help it. Every second matters. Every second means less chance of bringing someone back. 5 minutes, then 10, 15. Sweat soaked through my scrubs. My arms ached, but we didn't stop. None of us did. At 20 minutes, the room grew quieter, not in action, but in spirit. Voices lost their edge of urgency and slipped into repetition. The rhythm of trying because you have to, even when you know the odds are slipping away. At 25 minutes, I caught the resident's eyes, young and already shadowed with defeat. I told him to keep going. I told myself the same thing. but inside I was already preparing for the words I hated most. At 30 minutes, I looked at the monitor one last time. Flatline. I'd listened with my stethoscope pressed against his chest. Nothing. The air in the room seemed heavy, pressing in from every side. I called the time of death. The team moved with the quiet ritual that follows. The monitor was silenced, the medications set aside, the bag mask removed. A nurse covered his body with a sheet up to the shoulders. We all lingered for a moment, catching our breath, each of us silently wrestling with the futility of what we'd just done. This was the part of medicine no one ever prepares you for. Not the heroics, not the saves, but the surrender. Walking away, admitting you've lost. I wrote the notes mechanically, the pen scratching across the chart, recording the details that would one day be read like statistics but never capture the reality of the moment. Another man gone, another family to be told. And then the silence. That silence I mentioned earlier, the kind that fills the room when everything stops. It isn't peaceful. It's oppressive, unnatural, like the whole world is holding its breath. That night it lasted longer than usual because I didn't leave right away. Something kept me there, staring at the man's face, at the faint shadow of stubble on his chin, at the way his hand rested limp against the sheet. I thought about the fact that somewhere in the waiting room or across the city, someone who loved him had no idea yet that his life had just ended. I thought about how fragile we are, how easily the heart just decides it's done. And then it happened. The monitor, which had been flat and dark, suddenly shrieked to life. The sharp, rapid beeping of a pulse burst into the room like a scream, making everyone jump. I looked at it, disbelieving as the line traced a rhythm, irregular, weak, but unmistakably real. His chest rose, not with our compressions this time, but on its own. The nurse gasped. The resident cursed under his breath, backing away like he'd seen a ghost. For 30 minutes this man had been gone, and now, impossibly, he wasn't. I froze. For a moment I didn't move, didn't think, didn't breathe. I just stared at that monitor, at the jagged line cutting across the screen, at the evidence that what I knew to be true, what every medical textbook, every training, every law of biology insisted was impossible, was happening right in front of me. A dead man's heart had started beating again. I blinked hard, my pen still hovering over the chart, the words I'd just written swimming on the page. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I had fallen asleep standing up or if something deeper had taken hold of me. What I had just experienced, the monitor shrieking, the impossible return of life, felt so vivid, so real, and yet when I looked up, the room was still. The monitor was dark. The patient lay motionless under the sheet. My team was clearing instruments quietly, moving with that weary resignation that always follows the end of a code. I realized I had been somewhere else. A daydream, I told myself. A strange slip of the mind in the quiet after battle. I rubbed my eyes, embarrassed. Maybe the exhaustion was finally catching me. Decades in this place had taught me to expect adrenaline crashes, but never like this. Never so sharp, so real. My heart was pounding, sweat cold on the back of my neck, the echoes of that phantom beeping still ringing in my ears. I steadied my hand and went back to the chart, ready to sign the final line, the confirmation that this life had ended on my watch. And then it happened again. The monitor screamed, not in my head this time, not imagined. The flat black screen lit up with jagged lines, and the piercing beep cut through the silence like a blade. I dropped my pen, staring at the machine, unable to trust my own senses. "Wait!" I heard my own voice crack. "Is this real? Am I awake?" The nurses froze. The resident looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Doctor," he said, uncertain. half expecting me to dismiss it as some glitch. But there it was, an irregular rhythm, faint but present, pulsing across the screen, and beneath it, the undeniable rise and fall of the man's chest, shallow but his own. I stumbled forward, pressing my stethoscope to his chest. At first I braced for the hollow silence I'd already heard once. Instead, faint and quivering, there it was. A heartbeat. Fragile, but real. My head spun. I had just seen this exact moment in that vision, if that's what it was, only seconds before. It was impossible, absurd, and yet here I was, caught between déjà vu and miracle, with no room left to deny it. My hands shook as I snapped out of my daze and shouted, "He's back! Get the crash cart ready again. Move!" The room erupted in motion, disbelief momentarily shoved aside by instinct. A nurse yanked the sheet back, another reattached the leads, and the resident fumbled with the IV lines, adrenaline surging through his young face like a second wind. The defibrillator charged, not for a flatline this time, but to stabilize a rhythm dancing dangerously between life and collapse. As the team worked, I couldn't escape the question circling in my head. Had I just seen this before it happened? Was it exhaustion, tricking me into a hallucination? Or had some part of me, some part of reality, split open for a moment to show me what was coming? Doctors pride themselves on science, on facts, on what can be measured and charted. But in that instant, with my pulse racing and my patient's heart flickering like a dying flame suddenly refusing to go out, I wasn't sure where medicine ended and something else began. I caught the nurse's eye as she called out the vitals, her voice trembling. Blood pressure low but present. Oxygen sats improving. She shook her head, whispering under her breath as if afraid to speak the thought aloud. "This doesn't happen, not after 30 minutes. She was right. By every measure we had, this man shouldn't have been alive. Cells begin to break down within minutes of oxygen deprivation. The brain, especially, can't survive that long. Even in the rare cases of resuscitation, after prolonged arrest, the damage is catastrophic. And yet, here he was, blinking faintly, his lips twitching as though testing the air, alive, against every law of biology I'd ever learned. The resident leaned close to me, his voice low and shaken. "Doctor, what just happened? Did we call it too soon?" I wanted to answer him with certainty, to put my authority between him and the chaos of what we were seeing. But the truth clawed at me. I didn't know. And worse, I had seen it before it happened. I tried to ground myself in the practical, the concrete. Check his pupils. Get a repeat EKG, labs. Stat the words, steadied me, gave me the illusion of control. But as the monitors lit with new readings and the nurses rushed around me, I couldn't silence the question that whispered louder with every beep of that machine. Had I just witnessed a miracle or a warning? The room stabilized into that tense rhythm again, but this time it was different. Before we had been fighting against silence, dragging a body back from nothingness. Now, impossibly, there was something to fight for. The monitor pulsed with weak but undeniable beats, like fragile footprints refusing to be washed away by the tide. Every sound, every number felt surreal, as though we were witnesses to a reality that had slipped its tracks. "Pupils reactive," the nurse reported, shining her penlight into the man's eyes. She glanced at me, the disbelief written on her face. They shouldn't be. The resident leaned over the EKG printout, his brow furrowed. "Sinus rhythm. Unstable. But it's there." His voice broke halfway, caught between awe and fear. "How the hell—" I cut him off gently. "Focus. Get a blood gas. Check potassium, calcium, troponins, the whole panel. I want to know if there's any explanation." It steadied me to say it, to reach for the familiar scaffolding of medicine, as though lab results could anchor me in reality. We moved him to CT, the gurney rattling down the corridor, fluorescent lights strobing overhead like a metronome for my racing thoughts. His skin was clammy but warm, a detail that clashed with the memory of him lying cold under the sheet. I kept touching his wrist, his pulse faint beneath my fingers, half expecting it to vanish like smoke. In the scanner, the images came through. No intracranial bleed, no obvious stroke, no massive pulmonary embolism. Nothing that would explain a collapse, let alone a resurrection. Each result that ruled something out only deepened the void of understanding. The resident shuffled the films, muttering, "This makes no sense." He was gone, flatline, for 30 minutes. Back in the bay, the labs trickled in. Electrolytes. Normal. Cardiac enzymes. Slightly elevated, but not catastrophic. Blood gases. Acidotic, as expected, but not consistent with prolonged death. Every number mocked me with its ordinariness, as if the universe itself was conspiring to deny what we had seen. I found myself staring at the monitor again, watching those fragile beats, as though hypnotized. My vision replayed in my head, the phantom beeping, the impossible return I'd glimpsed before it happened. I tried to reason with myself. Exhaustion, adrenaline, stress-induced hallucination. But there was a weight to it, a clarity I couldn't dismiss. I had heard stories, whispered in locker rooms late at night, of doctors and nurses who swore they'd seen things before they happened, felt presences in trauma bays long after bodies had been taken to the morgue. I'd always dismissed them as coping mechanisms, the mind bending under the strain of too much death. But now, I remembered a mentor from my residency, a stern, brilliant man who once told me in a rare moment of vulnerability, "You'll see things you can't chart, things you can't explain. Don't let them shake your practice, but don't ignore them either." At the time, I thought it was just philosophy. Tonight, it felt like prophecy. The patient stirred, his eyelids fluttering. A soft groan escaped his throat, ragged and thin but achingly human. The nurse gasped. I leaned close, my voice low, as if speaking to a ghost. "Sir, can you hear me?" For a second I thought he was going to answer. His lips parted, his chest hitched, but then he slipped back into unconsciousness. Still, that sound, the groan of life, of presence, rooted itself inside me. Dead men don't make noise. We stabilized him through the night. Fluids, oxygen, careful drips of dopamine to keep his blood pressure from cratering. Every hour I expected him to crash again, for the monitor to betray us and return to silence. But he didn't. He clung on, defying every rule I had ever learned. When I finally stepped out of the trauma bay, the hallway felt different. The same humming lights, the same antiseptic air, but the shadows seemed longer, the quiet heavier. My reflection in the glass of the ER doors looked pale, older, haunted. I thought again about the vision, the daydream, the premonition, whatever it was. Had I seen what was coming? Or had my mind somehow prepared me for the shock? Was it warning, or was it something far stranger? I didn't have answers. And in medicine, not having answers is more frightening than any horror story. Because answers are what keep you steady, what keep the darkness from swallowing you whole. But that night, with a patient who had been gone for 30 minutes now alive in a bed behind me, and with the echo of that phantom monitor still ringing in my ears, I knew I'd stepped into a place where medicine ends and mystery begins. As I stood there in the dim light of the emergency room, staring at the man whose heart had no right to be beating, a memory clawed its way out of the dark recesses of my mind. It wasn't the first time I had brushed against something that made no sense. Years earlier, during my residency, I'd been called to a code in the ICU. A young woman, barely in her 20s, had suffered massive trauma after a car accident. We fought for her for nearly an hour before the attending called it. I was the one who had to remove the intubation tube, the one who adjusted the sheet over her face. It was my first declaration of death. I remember standing at the foot of her bed, my gloves sticky with blood and sweat, when I felt it. Not saw, felt. A presence, warm and close, as if someone was standing right behind my shoulder. The kind of sensation that prickles the hair at the back of your neck, that makes you turn even though you know you'll find no one there. I turned anyway. The ICU bay was empty, the hall quiet. But for the briefest instant, I caught sight of something impossible in the glass window. My own reflection, yes, but not just mine. A second shape beside me, faint, blurred, a silhouette leaning forward, as though looking down at the girl we just lost. And then, gone. Just me again, pale and shaken in the fluorescent glare. I never told anyone. How could I? Residents were supposed to be made of iron, not given to whispers of shadows and ghosts. I locked it away, told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of light, the grief of watching someone so young slip away. But the weight of it never left me. And now, as the monitor screamed back to life for a man who had been dead for half an hour, I couldn't stop the memory from colliding with the present. It was the same feeling, the same shift in the air, as though something unseen had brushed the world just enough to leave a scar. Back then, it had been silence, a whisper of a presence I couldn't explain. Tonight it was a scream from the monitor, a life snatched back from the grave. I pressed my hands to the edge of the gurney, grounding myself in the cold metal. No, I whispered under my breath, to myself more than anyone else. Not again. This isn't... I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Because what word could I use? Coincidence? Hallucination? Miracle? Premonition? None of them fit. None of them could explain why my memory of that shadow in the ICU window now seemed like the first verse of a story that was still unfolding. For the rest of the night, as we kept the patient alive against every expectation, that flashback stayed with me, circling in my head like a moth to flame. It was as though I had been warned years ago, but only now did I understand the warning. And that terrified me more than death itself. The next morning, the hospital halls felt different. The ER is never quiet. Not truly, but there was a hum in the air that wasn't just fluorescent lights or the shuffle of shoes on linoleum. It was the whisper of something unspoken, a current moving from nurse to nurse, orderly to orderly. Eyes followed me when I walked past, subtle but heavy, as if they were waiting for me to confirm that what they had seen the night before had really happened. When I stepped into the break room, 2 of the night shift nurses fell silent mid-sentence. One of them quickly looked down at her coffee, stirring it though it was already cold. The other glanced at me and asked, "Doctor, how's the patient?" Her tone was casual on the surface, but I could hear the crack in it, the unsteady edge that betrayed what she really meant. How do we explain this? "He's stable," I said, my voice lower than I intended. Unstable rhythm, but holding. "He's alive." Alive. I said it as though it were just another medical fact, but even I couldn't keep the doubt out of my tone. I'd pronounced him dead. We all had. The chart, the record, the 30 minutes of silence. It was all there, yet alive he was, occupying a bed in the ICU like nothing had happened. When his family arrived, the atmosphere thickened further. A wife, 2 grown children. They came with that hollow look I know too well, the look of people rehearsing grief in the car before walking through the doors. The charge nurse and I exchanged a glance. Who would tell them? What would we even say? We gathered in the small consultation room. I opened my mouth to speak, but the wife cut me off, her eyes brimming with tears. "Please," she whispered. Just tell me he's gone quickly. Don't make it worse than it already is. For a moment I froze. I felt the words I had prepared, the speech I had given countless times, die in my throat. Instead, I heard myself say, "He isn't gone. He's alive." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. She stared at me, her face frozen between disbelief and fury, like she thought I was being cruel. One of the children laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "What? That's not funny." "It's not a joke," I said. Last night, after we called it, his heart started again. We don't know how. We're still running tests, but he's stable enough for you to see him. I watched their faces shift, denial collapsing into shock, shock into confusion, confusion into something that looked like fear. They followed me to the ICU, and when they saw him lying there, machines humming, chest rising and falling on its own, the wife gasped and covered her mouth. She didn't rush to his side the way families usually do. She stood at the doorway, trembling. I think, in that moment, some part of her wasn't sure if what she was seeing was her husband, or something that had come back in his place. All that day, whispers trailed me, in the charting room, in the hallways. 30 minutes. Declared dead. Came back. Some of the older nurses shook their heads like they'd finally seen proof of the stories they'd only whispered about during long shifts. Others avoided the subject altogether, as if speaking it aloud would give it power. I tried to bury myself in work, but every time I passed the ICU, I felt that pull. That unnatural sense that the universe had bent, just slightly, and I was standing in the crease. I checked his vitals more times than I needed to, not out of duty, but because I couldn't shake the need to see it with my own eyes. A man who had crossed over and somehow returned. Years have passed since that night, and still I can't let it go. I've worked hundreds of codes since, pronounced more patients than I care to count, and each time, when the monitor goes flat and the silence falls, I find myself waiting for the impossible scream of the monitor, for the jagged line to carve itself across the screen again. It never has, not once. That case stands alone, unrepeatable, unexplainable. Sometimes late at night when the ER grows quiet and the shadows stretch across the tile, I think back to the way it unfolded. The vision I had before it happened, the shadow in the ICU years before that, the look on his wife's face when she saw him alive again. And I wonder, was it a mistake of biology, a glitch of electricity, or was it something else entirely? Something that doesn't belong in a chart, something that doesn't care about science or training. I'm an ER doctor. My world is built on evidence, on numbers, on facts. But this case cracked that foundation in a way I've never been able to mend. In the days that followed, the man remained in the ICU. His body was weak, his brain uncertain, but against every expectation, he lived. We monitored him relentlessly, waiting for the collapse that never came. There were moments when his eyes fluttered open, when he seemed to look at me with recognition, or maybe accusation. I could never tell. Once, as I adjusted his IV, his lips moved. I leaned close, straining to hear. He whispered one word. Cold. I asked him to repeat it, but his eyes slipped shut again, his breathing shallow. That single word lodged itself in me like a splinter, impossible to ignore. Was he describing what he remembered? The cold of the grave? The cold of nothingness? Or had it been just a fragment, a meaningless sound born from a damaged brain? I'll never know. When he was eventually transferred out of the ER to long-term care, the whispers followed. Some staff said it was a miracle. Others muttered words they'd never use on record. Unnatural, wrong, a mistake of fate. I kept silent. My notes were clinical, factual, stripped of the unease that gnawed at me. But inside, I couldn't escape the truth of what I had seen, of what I had felt. Even now, years later, when I walk past that same trauma bay, I sometimes pause at the doorway. I see the metal rail of the gurney, the humming monitor, the cold shine of the tile floor, and it all comes back with unbearable clarity. I remember the silence after I declared him gone, and the scream of the monitor tearing through it. I remember the way I had seen it happen before it happened, as if some curtain had lifted for just a moment to show me the impossible. I tell myself it was exhaustion, stress, a hallucination brought on by too many nights and too many deaths. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that shadow from years before in the ICU window, the one that leaned over the bed of the girl we lost. And I wonder if it was watching again that night. If it was there when the man's heart found its way back. The truth is, I don't know what happened. I don't know if I witnessed a miracle, a mistake, or something that has no name. I only know that medicine failed to explain it, and my mind has failed to forget it. Every time I pick up a pen to sign a death note, my hand hesitates. Every time the monitor goes flat, I wait a beat longer than I should. And every time I walk out of that room, I hear an echo of that impossible beeping, as though it's chasing me down the hall. Some nights, when the ER is still, I swear I can almost hear it again. The case will always haunt me. Not because I failed, but because for once, medicine gave me no answers. And I was left staring into the shadows, knowing that something crossed back over when it never should have.